Hi friends, I'm Bryn.
And I'm Courtney.
And this is Friends Who Crime. Friends Who Crime. Hi everyone. Welcome to part 2 of the Austin Yogurt Shop Murders series, I guess you would call it. This is part 2 out of 3. And of course I have welcomed Courtney back for the second part. How's your week been, Courtney?
So far, so good.
We were just saying that today is just extra Monday-ish, and I'm ready to go to sleep, honestly.
Yeah, so am I.
I had someone ask me to hang out after I recorded, and I was like, no, not today.
Straight to bed.
Like, truly, I'm gonna implode into a pile of blankets. I really will. But in the meantime, we're going to talk about this case. Before we get into it, though, I do want to say I've been updating you guys on my plants, and I bought a new plant. All of my other ones died except for one when I moved, and I bought a new plant, and it's called a viola plant, which I think is just like violets. I think it's just flowers.
Okay, that's cool.
But they're cool, like purple and yellow and white, and I put them in a cute little flower pot, and I'm excited about it. I'm gonna try my best to keep them alive. We'll see. They're full sun, so I'm hoping that they get enough sun on my balcony. I don't get a ton of sun out there.
Oh yeah, I didn't think about that.
We'll see.
Yeah.
I'll keep you updated. All right, let's recap last week. We started this 3-part series. This is part 2. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, you're going to want to go back and listen to that. It's a pretty short one. It's like half an hour. But none of this is really going to make sense unless you have listened to part 1. So do that. We talked about the murders and the crime scene of the 4 teenage girls who were murdered: Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy. All of them were shot once except for Amy, who was shot twice and whose body was separated from all the others. It was difficult to get evidence from the crime scene because the building was set on fire by whoever killed these girls, and then of course the water destroyed everything when they put the fire out. We left off with police arresting 16-year-old Maurice Pierce because he had the gun that matched the caliber of one of the guns that was used at the crime scene, and he made a confession, but they had to let him go because his confession did not line up with the actual details of the crime scene, and there was no evidence to back up his confession at all. End scene. I do want to add, before we start this next part, that there, at the time, were 3 other teenage boys that were also kind of on the police radar. The 4 of them, Maurice Pierce plus 3 more that we're about to talk about, were hanging out at a mall near-ish by the yogurt shop the night that it happened. And somebody called the tip line and was like, oh, these 4 teenage boys were up to no good that night. The boys were questioned, and the other 3 were, like, let go immediately. Maurice Pierce eventually was also let go. After all of that, the case went totally cold for 8 years. 1999 is where we're going to start. And unfortunately, the reopening of this case was really just grasping at straws. In 1999, police had identified those 4 local teens as official suspects. There was 17-year-old Robert Springsteen, 17-year-old Michael Scott, 16-year-old Maurice Pierce, and 15-year-old Forrest Wellborn. All had been friends at high school, and, like I said, had been seen together near the mall on the night of the murders. We know about Maurice Pierce. In short, the early 1991 lead kind of evaporated, but 8 years later, a new task force decided to reinterrogate all 4 of them.
That's crazy. So they were suspects at the time, and they're now suspects again.
They were like, I would call the other 3 persons of interest. Maurice was like a suspect, but now 1999, it's all been reopened, and all 4 of them are officially suspects.
Okay. Yeah, I remember being really confused by that in the documentary. Just seemed kind of random. Like, they just pulled in some random kids, and I was like, how does this all connect?
Literally. We could end the episode right here. Of course, now they were all in their 20s, because this is 8 years later. And under a long marathon of questioning, Springsteen and Scott eventually each confessed separately and implicated each other. So they're pointing fingers at each other in separate rooms.
Well, and themselves, I guess.
Themselves. That's correct. But Wellborn and Pierce denied any involvement. They were pretty consistent.
Okay.
Saying they had nothing to do with it. They weren't there. But even with no fingerprints, no gun, no DNA, or other physical evidence tying any of these boys to the crime scene, police arrested all 4 for capital murder.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a bold move.
Yeah. The theory was a robbery turned homicide with Forrest Wellborn as the getaway driver lookout guy.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, right?
Sure, yeah. Okay.
I also wanted to mention, I did not realize that first-degree murder and capital murder were different charges in Texas.
Is capital worse? Sounds worse.
Yes.
Okay.
Capital murder is like there's an extra degree of severity, or it was a murder of someone important, or there's just an extra piece that makes it even worse.
Okay, gotcha.
So let's get into these interrogations, and see, even Basil doesn't like this. Boof. He's halfway under the couch and he can't get the rest of himself. Get out of there! Get out of there! This episode sponsored by Boof. Okay, let's get into these interrogations and quote-unquote confessions. The interviews with these boys were grueling. For nearly a week, detectives worked on Scott and Springsteen specifically in back-to-back sessions. Officers used really hard tactics. One undercover detective later admitted that they used a scripted READ technique, which stands for rapport, emotion, acceleration, despair. No. Wow. Run. Oh, I'm gonna be involved. Are they okay? Yeah, no, they're fine. It sounds worse than it is.
Stop the violence.
It sounds worse than it is. Okay, we're gonna try and keep going here. Okay, so they used the READ techniques. And these techniques were known to pressure suspects toward confession. Theoretically, they'd be used on someone you know did it, and you're trying to get a confession out of them. But in Scott's interrogation, one officer continually, coaxed out of him. He would start talking about the details of, he would throw out one tiny detail, and he'd be like, come on, Michael, you're doing great, tell us, let's get this done today, come on, you're doing so awesome. Under that pressure, Scott began to describe the crime in graphic detail, as if recalling every moment, almost like a hypnotist sort of situation.
Yeah.
He said, I remember one girl screaming, terrified. I hear the gun go off. I only pulled the trigger once. I hear another gun go off. It sounded like eyewitness testimony, but it was all coming from a teenager whose every statement had just been nudged out of him by interrogators. Meanwhile, in the room next door, Springsteen was being pressed mercilessly. One detective finally snapped, and excuse me for even letting this come out of my mouth, but this is a quote. This detective said, "You fucking know if you fucking raped her, just say it."
Wow.
And yeah, it gets worse. It gets worse. Springsteen, of course, just picture like a teenager, like picture your younger brother or something. And this cop is like, "You know if you did it, like just say it." And he blurts back out, he says, and again, I'm going to change some of these words here, but he says, "I stuck my D in her pee and I raped her." Which is disgusting.
Yeah.
It's a gross way to put it. It's gross that the police even were trying to coax that out of him. And it was recorded. For the police, it was played in court and played by news outlets. And you can hear that online, and I don't recommend it. In hindsight, nearly everyone recognizes that this is literally a textbook example of coerced confession. Both of them later recounted those confessions, obviously. Springsteen told 48 Hours that police had, quote, berated them until they broke down, forcing him to say what they wanted him to say. His lawyer, Joe Sawyer, said Springsteen was so tired of what they were doing that he literally said to them, like, "I'll tell you any damn thing you want."
Yeah.
Just to end the ordeal.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair at that point. I feel like everyone has a limit.
Right. Right. And when you're 17, like you just you have no idea like what the consequences of that would even be.
Yeah.
Scott likewise later claimed that detectives essentially fed him a script of what to confess to. But remember, there was no independent evidence confirming anything that they said. Pierce's gun, when tested, did not match the murder weapons. It was inconclusive, which means no match. And no forensic clue, no hair, no fingerprint, bullet, nothing linked to any of the boys at all. So
why are they even still questioning them at this point?
Yep. That
Cool.
mm-hmm. And kind of an aside is courts in Texas now look at confessions like these really skeptically. And part of that comes from this case. I have very specifically Texas law article 38.22 requires any confession to be shown voluntarily and accompanied by Miranda rights. Scott and Springsteen's attorneys argued that these tapes were neither. They did not get read their Miranda rights, and these confessions were not voluntary. The tactics that were used in the interrogation were a Sixth Amendment issue. This is going to get a little, legally for a second, but the Sixth Amendment, part of it says that an accused person has the right to confront and cross-examine witnesses against them. The state used each boy's confession against the other at trial, even though neither one could testify about the other's tape, because then they would be incriminating themselves in the other person's trial. Does that make sense?
I think so.
So like at Springsteen's trial, they used Scott's taped confession saying that Springsteen did it, but Scott couldn't be there physically in court to testify because he'd be incriminating himself in the process. So Springsteen didn't have the opportunity to confront Scott to cross-examine and try and, what do you call it? Redeem himself.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's just all this big twisted mess of, their rights were violated. You can't do that to someone.
Yeah, and it seems like then every case would be like hinging on each other, and like the evidence is just that the other person has said things. Yeah, that
And
seems very convoluted.
that's the only thing they have to get them convicted. Like that's it. That's the evidence right there.
Well, at least they came up with laws out of this that prevent that. That's a good thing.
The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals ultimately agreed that this was unconstitutional. They said the admission of Robert Springsteen's statement violated Michael Scott's Sixth Amendment Confrontation Clause rights. Basically, neither of them were allowed to face each other's confession in court, yet each jury heard the incriminating confession anyway. Nevertheless, 2 of them were convicted.
That's insane.
Yep. So let's go through all 4. I'm going to tell you kind of what happened. Robert Springsteen, again, 17 when he was, or at the time of the crime. Yes, 17 at the time of the crime. He was finally tried in 2001, and he was convicted primarily on his taped confession and Scott's taped confession. He was sentenced to death.
Wow.
Yeah. It was later reduced to life in prison because he was a juvenile at the time. And it was like I could go on a whole tangent about that, but there was a case that happened, went to Supreme Court that said if you're a juvenile, you can't be sentenced to death.
Okay, that's good.
Michael Scott, also 17 at the time of the crimes, he was tried a year later in 2002. He was convicted mainly on the confessions of Scott and Springsteen. He received life in prison. Maurice Pierce, 16 at the time of the crimes, he was tried after Springsteen and Scott's trials, and prosecutors just kind of quietly dropped the charges against him because of lack of evidence.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so they were like, you just go ahead. We don't have anything on you. Forrest Wellborn, again 15 at the time of the crimes, never confessed, and a grand jury, they did what they called no-billed him, which is they just like refused to indict him. They're like, nah, we're not going to do that. Springsteen's and Scott's convictions, when they were first announced, kind of devastated the whole community. The girls' families felt a mixture of, I'm sure, like some kind of relief, but also horror. On one hand, there was no like stranger monster person that everyone had imagined, but the killers were kids from their own town.
Yeah, that is a terrifying thought.
On the other hand, hearing local youths admitting to the killings it was unimaginable. These, quote, these 4 girls were wonderful kids, said Jennifer and Sarah Harbison's mother, Barbara. They were so sweet. They were good kids. Bob and Pam Ayers, which were Amy's parents, struggled to reconcile that image with the terror of Amy's fate. Like, in a way, Amy, I don't know, I would say she, like, quote unquote, got the worst of it, but
it was all pretty bad.
It was all bad.
Yeah.
But her parents remembered Amy as a cowgirl who loved her horses. They said, I can see her riding and just taking off across a pasture, enjoying it because she loved it so much. Her dad added that every time he throws a leg over his horse, he thinks of her and wishes that she was still there. In interviews, they never sought any vengeance. None of the families were ever, like, seeking revenge. Like, that was never part of their motive. Barbara Wilson later said, all we ever wanted was the truth. Which, good on them.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Yeah, I'd be angry, but I get wanting the truth more than anything.
However, they did not wish for the prosecutions of innocent boys. So let's circle back around to that. Springsteen and Scott's lawyers fought hard to get their convictions overturned on appeal. In 2006, the court tossed out Springsteen's verdict, And in 2007, it ordered Scott's case retried. These reversals came despite the original judge of these cases having ruled the confessions voluntary. So they're kind of overturning everything.
Okay, well, that's good overall, I guess.
It's a nice reminder that constitutional rights ultimately should govern the outcome.
Yeah.
There's a case that also influenced this case that I went down a rabbit hole, so I'm going to talk about it a little bit real quick. But it's the Crawford v. Washington confrontation requirement that says that testimonies from a witness who does not appear in court are inadmissible unless the witness is unavailable and the defendant had prior opportunity to cross-examine them. The confrontation clause is not about the testimony's reliability necessarily. Like, it could be a totally reliable testimony, but it's about making sure that the defendant has the right to confront them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
People just, like, can't send in a video and be like, oh yeah, this person did it, and, like, not have to face questions.
Yeah, you know? No, that's good.
So there you go. That's my little aside. Crawford v. Washington. The court's rulings freed Springsteen and Scott pending retrial, so they were out on, I think they call it out on bond. Something like that. They were out in the world. Then in 2009, a new twist emerged. DNA had advanced a few steps at that point, and they were able to test some of the small amounts of preserved evidence. The investigators ran a YSTR test, which is a Y chromosome DNA test. It isolates male DNA and gives like a profile, and then you can compare that profile against other suspects to see if it's the same profile.
Okay, cool.
So they used this test on the swabs from the girls' sexual assault kits from the scene, and this was like super cutting edge at the time. It's not so much anymore, but it was at the time. They got a male profile, and it matched none of the 4 dudes. None of them. In other words, the forensic evidence said an unknown man, not Springsteen or Scott, was involved. The DA on the case, Rosemary Lemberg, told the court, quote, "This technology searches only for male DNA, and the hit simply did not include the defendants." Confronted with that unknown profile, Lemberg said she could not in good conscience retry the case without knowing who that male profile belonged to. And the judge agreed. So by October 2009, all charges against all 4 of them were dropped.
That's kind of a long time to have those charges.
That is a very long time.
And they still don't know who the unidentified DNA is.
Not at this certain time in the story here, no. But they were all arrested in 1999, and the last 2 were finally released. Like, finally, the charges were dropped in 2009. So that's 10 years.
Yeah, that's crazy for something that you weren't even involved in the first place.
Yep. And Maurice Pierce, it was even longer than that. It was almost 20 years.
Yeah, wow.
Isn't that insane?
Yeah, it is very insane.
And it leads to... We'll get there. I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. So let's talk about why DNA had taken so long to clear suspicion from them. This is another little aside here. The answer is, it's frustrating, but it's really simple. I've said it before, I'll say it a million times. The crime scene was just badly compromised. Fire and water destroyed almost all of the biological evidence. They salvaged what they could, some blood and some semen on the victims, but 1991 DNA techniques were, I'll call them primitive. For years, those tiny little samples gave them absolutely nothing. And as technology advanced through the 2000s, the case files were reopened, like for that reason, because they knew technology was advancing. Investigators sent the old swabs back to the lab several times. And in 2008, 2009, that's when they used the YSTR test. And they came up with that profile. How high quality is this profile, you might ask? It is very high quality. All 16 markers. So there's 16 markers on a full male DNA profile, and sometimes you can't get all 16 from a sample. They did get all 16 from this sample. So
Okay.
It's a very specific profile.
That's surprising.
Yeah. Lucky almost.
Yeah.
But this matched no suspect. So in practical terms, this meant the killer's DNA was on record, but they don't have anyone to match it to.
Okay. So they have to wait for the killer to commit more crimes, unfortunately.
Potentially, yes. In that era, courts treated results like this as exculpatory. So, like, because the DNA did not match the 4 suspects, those 4 suspects are ruled out in the eyes of the court completely. Like, there's no black or no gray area. It's black or white. They're out of there. No one could proceed against the 4 of them on confession-only evidence. Finally, when the forensics pointed elsewhere. With the unknown profile on hand and no match in CODIS, which, do you know what CODIS is?
I think so. Like the national or international or whatever database of DNA,
yes.
I guess.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And so they basically were left, the only option that was left was just to wait, like you were saying, for either better science or new crimes or new tips or information from people. While they waited, in the meantime, they collected reference samples from other people that might have been involved by chance. They rechecked databases. They did hundreds of comparisons over years and years, but there was no match for 34 years. The forensic failure, finger quotes, failure, wasn't like a wrong analysis. It was just the limits of technology and evidence. They could exclude subjects. They could exclude suspects, but they couldn't identify the culprit. For the victims' families, this was agonizing, right? Like, no one was convicted, but also no one was caught. And if you think about the perspective of the public at that time, like, I tried to relate it to now, like if this big crime had happened in Austin and people were arrested and then years later they were like, oh, never mind, they didn't do it, we have this like brand new technology, everyone would be like, are you sure though? Like, are you sure?
Yeah. It doesn't really seem like they've been sure throughout this entire process,
Right.
so
Exactly.
kind of hard to say.
So the families, you can imagine that they still had maybe a level of doubt some of the time, maybe. I'm just making that up, but I can imagine that they did, and they could doubt that decision to let especially Scott and Springsteen just like go free. They understood that these men might be innocent, and as one of the moms told authorities years later, we never wanted anyone to go to jail. Vengeance was never it. So just like reiterating that, like throughout the years, over and over again, all these families have said like, that's not what this is about.
Which is so sad because people did go to jail, but they never got the truth that they deserved. So,
Yep. By 2010, the original 4 suspects chapter had closed. Maurice Pierce never returned to a courtroom. And in 2010, he was stopped by police for running a red light. But then he got out of the car and fled on foot. Then when police finally caught up with him, they were struggling, and Pierce grabbed the knife out of one of the officer's belts and stabbed the officer in the neck, cutting
Oh my god.
2 arteries. And then Pierce was shot and killed by that officer in self-defense.
That's so sad. I didn't know that.
Me neither.
That happened. That's crazy.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah. And definitely wouldn't have happened if he hadn't had that horrible experience being interrogated for hours and hours and not trusting the police after that.
Exactly. That is literally my next sentence. His lawyer actually went, like, was interviewed and said, like, he ran from the cops because he is traumatized from being in jail several times for something he did not do.
Yeah, that's fair.
He's terrified of the cops. And, like, while I don't condone what he did, I understand why he did it.
Yeah.
But also, like, don't stab people.
Yeah.
Also.
Fair enough.
I always think, like, it's so sad because this person, he needed help that he did not get.
Yeah.
And ended up getting himself killed. I didn't find out if that officer lived. I want to find that out.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
let me know.
Yes, I'm gonna make a note. I'll come back next episode. I'll let you know. Forrest Wellborn remained free, never faced any charges. He was one of the ones that did not face charges. According to the Austin American-Statesman, our local newspaper, he still lives in the Austin area, but he keeps a really low profile. I would too. He doesn't speak to the press. There's not a lot of information out there about him. Springsteen and Scott, now off of death row in prison. That's in the past. They're completely exonerated. However, neither has been formally declared innocent. They had simply beaten the appeals in order to walk free. So it's kind of this gray area of, like, we haven't said you're completely innocent, but we haven't said, but you're not guilty. Does that make sense?
I guess.
That's kind of where that gray area creeps in.
Yeah.
Springsteen apparently now lives in West Virginia, but also stays away from the press. I think he did like a little 48 hours thing years and years ago after they were exonerated. But that's about it. And Scott is, like, off the map. Nobody knows where he's at. His previous lawyer, this year, 2025, said that last time he talked to Scott was 5 years ago, and 5 years ago he was living in South Austin. And
wow.
That's all we got.
I feel like I'd move to, like, a different country at that point. Like, just start over completely.
Get out of here.
Yeah, get out of there.
And so Scott and Wellborn are both still in Austin. Theoretically, we don't really know about Scott, but Wellborn is. And I was like, do they keep in touch? You think they keep in touch?
That is a good question. Probably not.
Probably not, right?
Yeah, I can't imagine that there would be a good basis for a relationship there at this point.
Because I guess they were kind of all pointing fingers at each other.
Yeah.
So they're probably not friends.
Yeah.
Trauma bonding. Hooray. Yeah. The city of Austin, after all of this, was left with mixed emotions. You could argue that the justice system had protected the families from punishing the wrong people. As veteran lead detective John Jones put it, he was the guy in charge of the case originally. He said, "We weren't going to sign on the line until we had met the standard beyond a reasonable doubt. We felt like we owed it to the families to get it right." And that's the right mindset, to me.
Yeah.
To me. So good on you, John Jones. But the cost was also very clear here. These 4 girls had still been murdered and still no justice. They still don't know who did it. Austin's residents never forgot about them in any of that time. We touched upon it a little bit in the last episode. The community kind of held out hope that one day the mystery would be solved, that DNA would be matched. And that's where we're going to leave off for part 2. In part 3, we're going to talk about what happened in the last 10 years or so. We're going to talk about the theories that people had before the case actually got solved. Things that you probably heard in that documentary. We're going to talk about other suspects, forensic breakthroughs, and then finally cracking the case after 34 years. And if you're listening and you don't already know the ending of this story, you literally will never be able to guess. You won't be able to guess. It just is so out of left field that they put this together. So we'll wrap everything up in a neat, tidy little bow, the way that I really wanted to, which is nice, convenient.
Yeah,
it got solved when it did.
Yeah.
Thank you, Courtney, again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I can't wait to finish this case up with you.
Yeah, I'm excited. This stuff I really don't know yet, so I'm excited for this next part.
Yeah. You should be. It's really interesting. I want to I'm not the book writing type of person, but I could write an article.
You should.
A blog.
Yeah.
Or, just a podcast.
That too, yeah.
Okay, guys, we'll talk to you, see you, whatever, next week. But until then, Boof says, remember, friends don't let friends commit crimes. Bye! And we're done.
Okay, that was a good one. I feel like I was equally...